It was supposed to be just another Sunday. I wore my blue dress, the one with tiny white flowers, and walked down to the church like I always did. But the moment I stepped into that familiar chapel and saw him, Raymond Cooper, smiling like nothing had ever happened, my knees nearly gave out. He wasn't alone. A young woman stood by his side, no older than my granddaughter. Her hand was curled possessively around his arm, her eyes laughing up at him like he was some fairy tale prince. And there he was, his white hair neatly combed, his jacket pressed, looking like the kind of man who would never raise his voice, never lie, never hurt a soul. But I knew better, because I had loved that man, and he had nearly broken me. My name is Ann Parker. I'm 73 years old, and I've lived in Fairhope, Alabama, nearly all my life. Folks around here know me as the widow who tends the rose bushes by the library and brings peach cobbler to Sunday potlucks. They don't know the woman I was just a few years ago, and they certainly don't know the woman I became after Raymond. I hadn't been looking for love. After losing my husband Charles to a stroke 12 years ago, I told myself I'd had my share of romance, but loneliness is a funny thing. It sneaks up on you when you least expect it, during early evenings when no one calls, or when the wind howls just a little too loud through an empty house. Raymond walked into my life one crisp October morning. We met at the farmer's market down by the marina. He complimented my scarf, said it reminded him of the sky just before dawn. I laughed, flattered but cautious. Still, there was something in the way he carried himself, polite, gentle, the kind of southern charm that could lull a woman's guard down with just a smile. We started small: coffee at the bakery, walks by the bay, conversations that stretched late into the night. He told me about his late wife, how she passed quietly in her sleep. He spoke of music, of books, of how he always admired women who knew how to listen. I didn't realize then that he meant women who didn't speak up. Raymond made me feel seen, not just as a woman, but as someone who still mattered. He held my hand like it was something sacred. He'd bring me wildflowers, sing old Willie Nelson songs while he cooked scrambled eggs on Sunday mornings. It felt nice, safe. I told myself it was okay to fall again, even at 70. Maybe it wasn't too late. My friends were surprised, even a little envious. "You're glowing," Anne, Linda Monroe, my neighbor, had said, and truthfully, I felt alive again, like I'd stepped out of the shadows I'd been hiding in for years. So when Raymond asked me to move in with him, it felt natural. I was spending most nights at his house already. "We're not getting any younger," he joked, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Let's enjoy what time we've got." I wish I'd listened to the way his tone shifted that night. I wish I'd noticed how tightly he gripped my wrist when I hesitated. But love, or what you think is love, makes you blind. I packed up my things and left the house Charles and I had shared for 32 years. I told myself I was beginning a new chapter, and for a little while, it really did feel that way. But, looking back now, that move was the beginning of my undoing. At first, the changes were subtle, so subtle that I mistook them for affection. Raymond started calling more often, checking in on me several times a day. "Just wanted to hear your voice," he'd say. "Make sure you're okay." I found it sweet, even flattering. It had been so long since anyone cared that much about where I was, what I was doing, how I was feeling. But then he began asking questions I hadn't expected. "Why'd you stay so long at Linda's today? What were you two laughing about on the porch? You know she never liked me." Right, I chuckled the first time he said that. brushing it off as a joke. But his face was stony. That night, he didn't kiss me goodnight. After that, I noticed a shift. Whenever I made plans without telling him, first lunch with the girls, a visit to the church pantry, he'd sulk or go quiet for hours. If I asked what was wrong, he'd say things like, "I just thought you'd want to spend time with me." Guess I was wrong. He had a way of making me feel guilty, even when I hadn't done anything wrong, like I was somehow betraying him just by living my life. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at the pharmacy, Mark Henley, a retired mechanic whose wife had passed a few years earlier. We chatted briefly about the weather and our aching backs, nothing more than friendly talk. But Raymond saw us from across the parking lot. That night, he didn't speak a word at dinner, just sat there, stabbing his mashed potatoes like they'd done him harm. "You like chatting up other men now?" he finally said, without looking at me. I blinked, unsure of what I'd just heard. "Mark, he's just an old friend." Raymond pushed back his chair. "I don't care who he is. You don't need to be making me look like a fool in public." It wasn't the words so much as the tone. Sharp, final, like a door had slammed between us, and I didn't know how to open it again. Still, I stayed. I told myself he was just insecure, that maybe if I reassured him more, he'd calm down. I tried harder to please him, cooked his favorite meals, canceled visits with friends, answered every call on the first ring. He rewarded me with smiles and brief tenderness, as if doling out affection was something I had to earn. One Sunday, I decided to wear a yellow dress Charles had once loved. It was bright and cheerful, with tiny pearl buttons and a soft lace collar. I hadn't worn it in years. Raymond didn't say a word when he saw me, just frowned and muttered, "Looks like you're trying to impress someone." "I wore this for me," I said, my voice small. He scoffed. "No woman your age should be dressing like she's 25. I felt myself shrink under his gaze, embarrassed and unsure. I went upstairs and changed into something plain. That was how it started, little by little. I stopped being myself. I didn't notice how much I was disappearing until I saw Linda again. She'd come by to drop off some fig preserves and found me in the garden, hunched over, dirt under my nails, sweat soaking through my blouse. "You okay, Han?" she asked, concern lining her voice. I tried to smile, just doing a little weeding. She looked me over. "You've lost weight. And where's that laugh of yours? Anne, haven't heard it in a while." I mumbled something about being tired and walked her to the gate. Raymond watched from the porch the entire time. Later that night, he accused me of talking bad about him, said he saw how Linda looked at me like I was a poor, broken thing she needed to rescue. "You better remember who took you in," he said, voice low and close to my ear. "No one else wants an old widow with a used heart." That was the first time he made me cry, but not the last. Back then, I still believed in the goodness of people. I thought maybe Raymond had just been hurt too deeply, that he was afraid of being left. So I clung to the memories of our early days, those walks by the bay, the way he used to sing in the kitchen. I thought if I loved him enough, maybe I could bring that man back. But I was wrong, and the more I gave, the more he took. The first time I truly felt afraid in Raymond's house, it wasn't because of yelling or slamming doors. It was the silence, that awful, creeping silence that came after I had said something he didn't like. We were in the kitchen. I had mentioned seeing a flyer at the market about a local book club starting up again at the library, something I used to enjoy back in the day. I didn't even finish my sentence before he turned off the faucet and looked at me flatly. "I thought we talked about this," he said. "You don't need to be running around with a bunch of old ladies gossiping about nonsense. What do you even need from them that you don't get here?" I blinked, unsure of what he meant. "It's just a book club, Raymond. One evening a week. I miss having something to look forward to." He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He simply stared at me with such quiet coldness. It felt like the air had left the room. Later that night, I found my purse missing. My phone, too. I put them away, he said casually, "so you can rest and not think about silly things. You're too worked up lately. It's not good for you." I didn't have the strength to argue. Not that night. I told myself I'd get them back in the morning, but by then, they were locked in his office, an office I was no longer allowed to enter. That was when the isolation truly began. Little by little, he stripped away the pieces of my life. My phone disappeared more often. He stopped letting me drive, claiming the brakes on my car needed repair. I asked about calling a mechanic and he brushed it off. "Don't worry, I'll get to it." He never did. I noticed that our groceries changed too. He controlled what we bought, what we ate. If I mentioned missing something, he'd say I was being picky or wasting money on junk. The fridge became a symbol of control. What was inside reflected how much I was allowed to feel like myself. The only person who ever came by anymore was the mailman, and even then. Raymond would get the mail before I could. I started to forget what day it was. Hours bled together in that house, where every window seemed to look out onto nothing. One afternoon, I walked out to the porch without telling him. I just needed some air, some sunlight, anything to remind me the world still turned. He followed me out minutes later, his face tight with fury. "Are you trying to embarrass me in front of the neighbors?" I frowned. "I was just sitting outside." "You were pacing," he snapped, "looking like you'd lost your mind. What if someone saw you and started asking questions?" I stared at him, stunned. "Raymond, why are you talking to me like I'm some burden? I'm not doing anything wrong." He stepped closer. "You keep testing me, Anne. And one day, you won't like what happens when I've had enough." His voice was low, but sharp enough to cut skin. I backed away and nodded, my throat too tight to speak. That night, I cried into my pillow, biting down on the sheet so he wouldn't hear. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I started keeping a little notebook, hidden beneath the liner of the bathroom cabinet drawer. I wrote down dates, things he said, things he did. Not because I thought I could do anything with it, but because I needed to remember that I wasn't going crazy, that it was real, that I was still here. One entry read Thursday. He said I looked stupid in my cardigan, called me a shriveled lemon, took my glasses and said I'd get them back if I behaved better tomorrow. I can't see without them. Another said Sunday. He didn't let me go to church, told me people were starting to talk. I don't think they are. I think he just doesn't want anyone to see me. He stopped letting me answer the phone. I heard it ring once, Linda's voice on the machine, soft and concerned. "Hey, Anne, I've been trying to reach you. You okay? Han." He erased the message before I could even get near it. "You don't need her," he said. "All she ever did was talk you out of things." That was when I realized something that terrified me more than anything. He didn't just want me dependent. He wanted me erased. Each day, a little more of me disappeared. I didn't laugh anymore. I didn't hum while cooking. I didn't write postcards to my niece in Mobile like I used to. It was like I was living behind glass, tapping to be let out. but no one could hear me. One evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were hollow. Her cheeks sagged not from age, but from sorrow. Her lips stayed pressed together, as if afraid to speak. I whispered to myself, "You're still here, Anne. Don't let him take the rest of you." I didn't know how yet, but I had to find a way back, because if I didn't, I wasn't sure there'd be anything left to return to. There comes a point in every kind of pain where your body stops reacting the way it used to. The sting dulls, the surprise fades, and you stop asking why. That's what happened to me. I stopped asking why Raymond would snap at me for humming while folding laundry, why he'd rip up letters before I could read them, why he called me useless when I struggled to open a jar with arthritic hands. One morning, I reached for a coffee mug, the blue one with the little white dog that Charles had given me on our 40th anniversary. I loved that mug. I used it every morning, even after Charles passed. It made me feel like part of him still greeted me with the sunrise. But that morning, Raymond grabbed it from my hand and smashed it into the sink. "Use the plain ones," he said. "I don't want to keep seeing reminders of your dead husband in this house." I stared at the shards in the sink, tears burning behind my eyes. But I didn't cry, not out loud. That, too, had become a silent act. I learned to live around his moods, stepping lightly, speaking only when spoken to. I prepared meals exactly as he liked them. I cleaned constantly, not because the house needed it, but because it gave me something to do, something that felt like control in a life where I had none. And still, he found ways to hurt me. He didn't use fists. No bruises ever marked my skin. But the wounds he left were deeper wounds made of words, of looks, of the aching absence of kindness. "You were never that pretty, even when you were younger," he once muttered while I brushed my hair in front of the mirror. "I just felt sorry for you." I remember running my fingers through the thinning strands, wondering when I had stopped seeing myself as a woman. I was becoming a ghost inside my own body. He told me I was lucky he took me in, that no one else would ever want a dried-up thing like me. He said if I ever left, he'd make sure everyone in Fairhope knew I was senile, that I couldn't be trusted, that I'd lost my mind, and I believed him, because he didn't just isolate me from the world. He poisoned my belief in myself. He rewrote my story one line at a time until I started forgetting the sound of my own voice. I missed Linda terribly. I thought about her often, her laugh, the way she used to bring lavender cookies over on Fridays. Once, she left a little book of poems in my mailbox just because she knew I loved Emily Dickinson. Raymond found it. He tore it in half. "Your friends don't care about you. They just like having someone weaker around so they can feel good about themselves." I wanted to scream. That's not true, but I couldn't find the voice for it. The days blurred, each one shaped around his moods, his schedule, his expectations. The smallest slip, a burned piece of toast. Forgetting to turn off a light could set him off. And when he was angry, he wouldn't yell. Not always. Sometimes he'd go completely quiet for days, refusing to speak to me, refusing to let me eat with him. It was a punishment, a reminder of who held the power. And then came the most humiliating thing of all. He started keeping track of my bathroom habits. "I don't want you wasting water," he said one day as I flushed. "You get 2 flushes a day. That's enough." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. There was no privacy. No dignity. I felt more like a tenant, or worse, a prisoner than a partner. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake while he snored beside me, too afraid to cry, too numb to sleep. I'd stare at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, counting the seconds between each blade passing the same spot over and over, like my thoughts. I kept wondering, is this what I gave up my home for? My little yellow house near the bay, the one Charles and I painted together, where we raised 2 boys and planted a garden full of marigolds. I had traded that sanctuary for this quiet, cruel hell. One night, while Raymond was out, he went to town alone. More often now, I tiptoed into his office. My heart pounded as I jimmied open the drawer I'd seen him lock before. Inside, I found my phone, dead, dusty, forgotten. Beside it were envelopes, letters addressed to me from my niece in Mobile, from my church group, even from the local women's center. He hadn't just intercepted them. He'd hidden them for months. He didn't want me to know that people still cared. That was the night the fire started to flicker back in me. Not a blaze, not yet, but a spark. I took the letters and tucked them into my waistband. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but they felt like a lifeline, proof that I hadn't been completely erased. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling and whispered words I hadn't said in a long time. You are still Anne. You are still alive. And one day, you're going to leave this place. I didn't know how. I didn't know when, but I knew I had to survive long enough to find out. There are betrayals that crack the heart slowly, like water dripping against stone. Then there are betrayals that split it wide open in a single blow. Mine came on a Tuesday afternoon. Raymond had gone out, as he often did those days, always vague about where he was going. Running errands, he'd say, picking up supplies. I never dared ask for details anymore. Curiosity only brought punishment, but that day, something told me to search, not out of spite, but survival. I needed to know what I was up against. I started in his office again. My hands trembled as I unlocked the drawer with the small wire I'd hidden in the back of the linen closet. The old skills came back to me, the kind you don't think you'll ever need until your world is built on secrets. The phone was gone this time, but his laptop was still there, and, for once, he'd left it open. I had maybe 10 minutes, 20, if I was lucky. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just followed my gut. At first, it was nothing email chains with utility companies, junk mail from garden catalogs. Then I saw a folder marked TR sitting there bold as brass on his desktop. I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of emails, spanning months. The woman's name was Tiffany Reynolds. I didn't recognize it at first. But as I read, my stomach twisted into knots. Tiffany was 34. She lived in Pensacola. She called him Ray Ray in her messages. She told him how lonely she was, how grateful she was for his support, and how she couldn't wait for him to come back and stay the weekend. Then I saw the money transfers, $300 here, $500 there, a plane ticket, receipts for hotel rooms under his name but sent to her address. And then there were photos of them together, at the beach, at a restaurant, even one of her in his arms on the same front porch where I used to sit, sipping lemonade and watching the sunset. He had told me he couldn't go on long walks anymore because of his knees, but there he was, grinning wide, hiking with her along a trail somewhere near Gulf Shores. I felt sick. My hands began to shake, tears welling up so fast I had to bite my lip to keep quiet. I took screenshots of what I could email them to the old account I used for grocery coupons, just in case I needed proof. This wasn't just infidelity. This was exploitation. He had used me as a cover, a convenience, maybe even as a wallet while he lived a second life behind my back. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Why he'd asked to use my credit card that one time when his accounts were frozen. Why groceries and bills seemed tighter, even though I was still contributing from my savings. Why he grew colder after each of his outings. It had nothing to do with me. It was about her. He wasn't some broken man with a wounded heart. He was a manipulator, a predator, and I had fallen right into his arms with open eyes and a lonely heart. I closed the laptop and returned everything exactly as it had been. Then I ran to the bathroom and threw up. That night, I didn't speak a word during dinner. Raymond noticed. Of course he did. "What's with you?" he asked between bites of cornbread. "You look like a ghost." I wanted to scream. "How dare you ask?" But I stayed silent. Not out of fear this time, but strategy. Because now I knew something he didn't know I knew, and that gave me power. The next few days, I played my part well. I smiled when he wanted me to. I cleaned like usual. I didn't try to reach for my phone. I didn't ask where he was going. I simply observed, took notes, stored away everything in that little notebook of mine, now hidden in a jar of flour on the top pantry shelf. I needed a plan. I couldn't just walk away, not without access to my money, not without help, and certainly not without exposing him for what he'd done. The old Anne would have begged for an apology, tried to fix what was broken, but that woman was gone. What remained was someone Raymond had underestimated. One evening, as we sat on the porch, he reached for my hand like he used to in the early days. His grip was firm, almost possessive. I forced myself not to flinch. He looked at me and smiled. "You're all I've got, Annie." I looked back at him and, for the first time, smiled too. Because I knew it was a lie, and I knew I wouldn't be his anything for much longer. I hadn't spoken to Linda Monroe in nearly 6 months, not since the day Raymond accused me of bad-mouthing him behind his back. After that, he'd made it clear I was to cut contact. No visits, no phone calls, not even a wave across the street. At first, I obeyed. Then I just forgot how to reach out. But now, I needed her. I waited until Raymond left for one of his overnight trips. He said it was to visit his cousin in Gulfport. I knew better. As soon as his truck disappeared down the driveway, I bolted to the kitchen, pulled out the flour jar, and grabbed my hidden notebook. Inside were the screenshots I'd printed from my email proof of his affair with Tiffany, the wire transfers, the hotel receipts. I tucked everything into a manila envelope, slipped on my worn sneakers, and stepped outside. The sun was bright, but I felt like a shadow. Linda lived just 5 blocks away. Each step felt heavier than the last. I hadn't walked this road in so long. It felt foreign and yet familiar, like an old hymn you forgot you knew. When I knocked on her door, my hands were sweating. She opened it fast, too fast. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought she might cry. "Anne," she whispered, as if I were a ghost. "Honey, is that really you?" I tried to smile. It cracked at the corners. I didn't know who else to come to. She pulled me inside before I could say another word. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one where we'd once shared tea and pecan pie. She poured me a cup before I could ask, as if no time had passed at all. "I was so worried," she said, placing a hand over mine. I left messages. I wrote letters. I even stopped by once, but he said you weren't feeling well. I never saw any of that, I said softly. He hid everything. She exhaled hard, shaking her head. I knew something was wrong. You disappeared like a light bulb blowing out. I reached into my bag and handed her the envelope. She opened it slowly, one photo at a time. She didn't speak for a long while. Finally, she said, "He's been cheating on you this whole time and using you." I nodded. I gave up my home, my friends, even my dignity. And he turned around and handed it to some girl in Pensacola. Her lips pressed into a line. He's dangerous. Anne, that kind of control, that kind of manipulation, it's not just cruel. It's calculated. I looked up at her. I want to leave. For good. But I can't do it alone. She didn't even hesitate. You won't have to. That afternoon, Linda helped me draft a safety plan. Her daughter, Rebecca, worked at a local women's center. Linda called her right away, and within hours, I had an appointment for the next morning. Bring every piece of documentation you have, Rebecca instructed over the phone. We'll help you get a protection order, access your bank, and start fresh. It sounded like freedom. It also sounded terrifying. I'd spent so long believing I was stuck that the outside world wouldn't understand, wouldn't care. But here they were, opening doors, holding out their hands. Before I left Linda's that day, she placed an old flip phone in my palm. It's simple, prepaid, and hidden in an Altoids tin. Keep it with you. If anything happens, anything, you call me, day or night. I hugged her tight. Thank you for not giving up on me. You don't get to disappear. Anne, not on my watch, back at Raymond's house. I moved like a ghost. He returned the next day, reeking faintly of hotel soap and cheap cologne. He tossed a bag of apples onto the counter like it was some kind of peace offering. You good? He asked casually. I nodded. Fine. He didn't notice my quiet confidence, my steady hands. He didn't see the phone hidden in my sewing basket or the envelope tucked behind the false panel in the hall closet. He thought I was still his. That night, I lay awake rehearsing what I'd say to Rebecca, how I'd describe the months of control, the emotional bruises no one could see. I wasn't ready to share it all yet, but I would, in time. The next morning, I told Raymond I was going to the post office. Want me to drive you? He asked. No need, I said, smiling faintly. I could use the walk. As I stepped outside into the morning light, I felt it for the first time in months. Air. Not the stale, heavy air of fear, but air that felt like mine. The wind picked up. The sun warmed my back. And as I walked toward town with that little tin tucked in my coat pocket and courage stitched into every step, I whispered to myself, "You're almost free." I never thought packing a small bag could feel like a revolution. It was still dark when I crept out of bed, moving as quietly as the wind in the trees outside. Raymond was snoring, deep and heavy. I watched him for a moment, not with fear this time, but with a strange sense of finality. I was leaving, and he didn't even know it. In my bag, my ID, a few clothes, the hidden phone from Linda, and the envelope of evidence. I left behind the jewelry he gave me, the scarves he liked me to wear, the things he used to mold me into someone I wasn't. I tucked a note under the kitchen sugar jar. Don't look for me. You already lost me. Then I walked out the door. No turning back. The walk to the women's center took 20 minutes, but it felt like 100-pound burden was finally peeling off my back with each step. I kept my head down and moved quickly. Every sound behind me made me flinch. I half expected to hear the roar of his truck or feel his hand grab my shoulder, but no one came. When I arrived, Rebecca Monroe, Linda's daughter, was waiting on the front porch. She looked just like her mama, strong chin, steady eyes, and the kind of presence that made you feel safe the second you stood near her. She gave me a gentle hug. "We've got you. Miss Parker, come inside." Inside was quiet, warm, with soft lighting and the smell of fresh coffee. A few other women sat in the common area, some older, some younger. One was rocking gently in a chair, hands wrapped around a mug like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. I felt an odd comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. Rebecca led me into a private room and let me take my time. I handed her the manila envelope, and while she reviewed the documents, I told her everything, not just about the betrayal, but the humiliation, the silence, the slow erasing of myself. She listened without interruption, no judgment, just understanding. "I want to file for a protective order," I said at last, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You should," she nodded, "and we'll help you. We'll walk with you every step of the way." The process moved faster than I'd imagined. They had a legal advocate on staff who helped me fill out the paperwork. She told me that Raymond's behavior, isolating me, controlling my finances, threatening me, fit the definition of coercive abuse. That gave the judge reason to sign an emergency order the very same day. Raymond couldn't come within 300 feet of me. He couldn't contact me. He couldn't touch my finances. And just like that, for the first time in almost a year, I could breathe without waiting for the next blow, verbal or otherwise. By the time the order was filed, I was settled into a safe apartment provided by the center. It wasn't large, but it was mine. A twin bed, a small kitchen, a soft blanket that smelled of lavender. That first night, I sat on the floor beside the window and watched the streetlights flicker. No one was yelling. No one was watching. I cried not from fear, but from relief. Over the next few days, Linda came by to visit me. She brought soup, socks, and a framed photo of us from a church picnic back in 2012. "You look so happy here," she said, setting it on the windowsill. I smiled. "I was. Then you will be again." I believed her. I began to attend group counseling sessions offered at the center. It was awkward at first, sharing pieces of my story with strangers. But slowly, something shifted. Each woman carried her own version of pain, of silence, of survival. And in those stories, I found a strange sort of sisterhood. We weren't victims. We were women who had endured. I also began working with a financial advisor who helped me recover access to my retirement funds. With legal support, we proved Raymond had manipulated shared resources under false pretenses. I filed a civil claim to recover what he had taken, and even though I wasn't in it for revenge, knowing that he would face legal consequences was its own kind of justice. By week 3, I got a new phone, my own number, my own name on the account. It was a silly thing, maybe, but that number felt like a declaration. I wasn't someone's possession anymore. I was Ann Parker, and I had returned to myself. The first thing I did with my new freedom was walk down to the pier in Fairhope. The wind off Mobile Bay was sharp that morning, tugging at the loose strands of hair around my face. I didn't mind. I stood at the edge of the wooden railing, watching the water ripple in soft layers. It had been nearly a year since I'd stood there. I closed my eyes and let the breeze carry away the fear, the shame, the silence. "I'm still here," I whispered. I made it. Those words felt like a prayer, a promise, a victory. Back at the apartment, I began to fall into a new rhythm, one built around me, not someone else's moods. I joined a morning yoga class for seniors down at the community center. The stretches were hard at first, but the laughter that filled the room was healing in its own right. I visited the library for the first time in over a year and checked out a worn copy of Little Women. I made soup just for myself and ate it slowly by the window, savoring every bite like it was a gift. And one afternoon, while volunteering at the women's center that had taken me in, I met a woman named Delilah. She was in her 50s, pale and thin, with a quietness about her that reminded me of how I used to look small, invisible, afraid to take up space. She sat in the corner of the room during orientation, picking at her sleeve, eyes darting around like a bird trapped in a cage. I walked over slowly and sat beside her. First day, I asked gently. She nodded. I didn't press her. I just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, offering presence. That was all I had to give. But sometimes, that's everything. Later, she found me in the hallway and whispered, "Thank you for not asking me to speak." That moment lit something in me. Helping her reminded me why I was still standing. So I asked Rebecca if I could stay on as a regular volunteer. "There's power in someone your age speaking up," she told me. "So many women think they're too old to leave, too far gone to start over. But you're the proof they're not." And just like that, I had a new mission. I began sharing my story first, in small groups, then at local churches, and eventually at a public safety forum hosted by the town council. My hands shook the first time I stood behind a microphone, but once I started speaking, the fear melted into purpose. I lost myself for a while. I told them, but I found my way back, and if you think age makes you helpless, I'm here to tell you it doesn't. It makes you wise, and wisdom is power. People listened. Women approached me afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking me for saying what they hadn't been able to say out loud. A few weeks later, I received an envelope at the shelter's mailing address. No return name, no note. Just a folded photo of me and Charles, our wedding day in 1969. I hadn't seen that photo in years. It must have been hidden away in Raymond's house. My hands trembled as I held it, not from fear, but something more tender, grief and closure. I placed it in a frame and set it beside the one of Linda and me at that picnic. 2 lives, 2 loves, 2 chapters that shaped me but did not define me. Fairhope had seen the quiet version of Ann Parker, the one who smiled politely, who blended in, who never made waves. But now, I was the woman who stood up, who walked out, who spoke truth, even when her voice trembled. And day by day, piece by piece, I was becoming whole again. It was a late October morning when I saw him again. I had just stepped out of the Fairhope Co-op with a bag of autumn squash tucked under my arm. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, and the sidewalks were dotted with families browsing local stands. I was smiling, really smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. Then I saw him. Raymond. He stood across the street, arms folded, leaning against his old pickup. His hair was thinner now, his belly more pronounced, and his shirt untucked, like he hadn't cared enough to dress himself properly. But what caught me wasn't the way he looked. It was the way he looked at me, like I was still his to intimidate. For a moment, instinct took over. My breath caught, and my legs tensed, like they wanted to run. But then something inside me shifted. I didn't run. Instead, I squared my shoulders, adjusted the strap of my bag, and crossed the street, step by step. I moved closer, each footfall a reminder that I was no longer the woman who cowered. He smirked when I approached. Heard you've been making a name for yourself. I didn't blink. That's right. I have. Spreading lies, too. You know, some folks still remember who I am in this town, and now they know what you did. His eyes narrowed. You always were dramatic. Anne, you left over a few harsh words and some misunderstandings. I felt the fire rise in my chest, not the fire of fear, but of truth. You isolated me. You controlled me. You took my money, my voice, and nearly my will to live. And now, you have the nerve to call that a misunderstanding. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. You don't get to rewrite what happened. I have a voice now, and I will use it. People nearby turned their heads. I saw a woman pause by the flower stand. A young man stopped his bike. I knew they were watching, but I didn't care. Raymond stared at me, silent for the first time in his life. And then he turned, walked back to his truck, drove away. That was it. No screaming, no apology, just a quiet retreat. But for me, it was everything. I stood there, heart racing, not from panic, but from relief, from knowing I had faced the man who once stripped me of power, and I had stood firm. Back at the center that afternoon, I told Rebecca what had happened. She smiled proudly. You took your power back, Anne. That's what healing looks like. It didn't erase the months I lost, but it affirmed something I had fought so hard to reclaim. I am not afraid anymore. It's been almost 2 years since I walked out of Raymond's house, and in many ways, it feels like a different lifetime. These days, I wake up to sunlight pouring through my window, not tension pressing down on my chest. I tend to the small garden outside my apartment, just tomatoes, herbs, and marigolds, like the ones Charles and I once planted together. I volunteer 3 days a week, teach a journaling class for women starting over, and every Sunday I share a cup of coffee with Linda on her front porch. I'm 73 now. I've lived a long life, one with joy. Yes, but also deep valleys of betrayal, fear, and pain. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. It's never too late to start again. For a long time, I believed love meant sacrifice, that if you just gave more, forgave more, tolerated more, things would change. I thought staying quiet made me strong. I thought enduring made me noble. But I was wrong. Love should never require the loss of yourself. What Raymond did to me wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It was the kind of quiet, creeping abuse that too many women, especially older women, face in silence. We're told we should be grateful someone still wants us, that we're lucky to have companionship, that if we just act right, the anger will stop. But no one should ever have to earn kindness. You are not too old to leave. You are not too broken to begin again, and you are never alone. I share my story now not because I enjoy reliving the pain, but because someone out there, maybe someone listening right now, is sitting in a quiet room wondering if the loneliness they feel is better than the fear they live with. If that's you, please hear me. You matter. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. And there is help waiting for you. It may be a friend you haven't spoken to in months, a shelter just down the street, or even the voice inside you that still whispers, "You're worth more than this." I'm living proof that healing is possible at any age, at any stage. The first step is terrifying. But what waits on the other side is a life that belongs to you. I look at myself now in the mirror, and I see a woman who found her way back not to who she was before, but to someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid. That is my greatest gift to myself. And maybe, just maybe, it can be a gift for you too. If my story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you care about, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words may help someone else take that first brave step. And if you'd like to hear more stories of strength, survival, and the power of starting over, please subscribe to the channel. Every voice deserves to be heard. Every story deserves a chance to heal. You're not alone, and it's never too late to begin again.